Friends, it's that time of year again. The unofficial start to summer has come and gone, the weather has gotten better in most places around the land, and last, but certainly not least, the beaches are open for business beyond the California Republic. So why don't you and I celebrate the coming summer solstice in style with a folding fabric roof or hood from the folks at Goodwood. So today we start with a bit of deja vu. If you have seen our Rolls Royce films before, then you know this engine. It is a 6.6 liter V12 twin turbocharged, puts out 563 horsepower, which comes in at 5,250 RPM. But really for us it's all about torque, and that's 575 pound-feet of torque, which comes in at an incredibly low 1,500 RPM. Now there's a couple of things going on. Number one, there is another borrowed piece from like the Ghost and the Wraith, and that is that 8-speed ZF transmission that is satellite controlled. But let's put that aside for a minute. There's another thing going on here where there is a dynamic pedal that basically adjusts the throttle mapping based on your input onto the pedal. So let's take the 563 horsepower and satellite guidance over our transmission and see if our dynamic foot changes things. So I would argue that you and I are very familiar with the ridiculous amounts of power this engine has in other applications. But our job today is to unpack how it works in this application. But to do that, we need to understand some numbers that are not of this car. So like the Ghost, that weighs 5,200 pounds. The Wraith weighs 5,300 pounds. So this has a 400 and 300 pound weight penalty over those two cars. So the reality is, how does it work here? Let's put our foot into it as we go uphill, and let's just say you're not at a loss for power. Okay, so now that we got that shocker out of the way, now let's press on to this dynamic throttle thing. And just as an aside, Rolls-Royces, there are no adjustments. It's basically this way or the highway. Actually, there is an adjustment. It's this. That's about all you get. So in this case, you put your foot into the throttle. There's a somewhat delayed downshift, but then it quickly pours speed on. Let's try that again. Please don't try this at home. And it builds speed so quickly, like to the point where I gotta slow down because I do not want to meet the local constable. But really what's going on here is you get like freight train type pulling power, even with 400 extra pounds. Like, not that you really need extra bragging rights with a car, but you could go out and like drag race in a Rolls Royce Convertible. And you know what? Maybe you should bring the pink slip because you probably win a few. So you guys know the old piece of life advice. Everything is not as it seems or as it appears. So in this case, this would look like a Wraith Convertible, but the folks in Goodwood, they would argue with you vehemently on it because they would say that 80% of the body panels are entirely new. But in actuality, there is a huge difference between this and the Wraith in that it is shorter, it's wider, the front bumper is longer, and the grille is actually recessed. And then of course it's a convertible, so it actually weighs more and some of the structural pieces have changed. So there is a sizable difference between a Wraith and a Dawn. So as you can imagine, the bits that affect driving dynamics need to be adjusted as well. So it's not exactly a carryover suspension. Yes, you have the air ride and you have the active roll bars, but everything has been recalibrated for the shorter car, the wider car, and the heavier car. So really, how does that all translate to out on the road? Now, as we dive off into this topic here, we need to take our car guy and gal preconceived notions and kind of throw them out the window, because something like this has a totally different mission in life. Its mission is composure. So now as we break it down into like air ride and active roll bars, what those pieces are doing is mitigating a long wheelbase, even though it's shorter here, and all that weight. So like we talked about in pulling power, this has to contend with an additional 400 pounds over the Ghost and 300 pounds over the Wraith. So let's take that theory and see how it plays out in practice. Now, this is not a place you'd normally drive this thing. Let's put our foot into it. Please don't try this at home. And notice we come around this turn, not a lot of lean. So what's happening is the air ride is counteracting the lean as I push the car harder into a turn. And it's doing so pretty quickly. Granted, I mean, are you going to scream around corners like a 911 Turbo S? No, but again, not the purpose. And it's amazing how composed it is. But notice something else. Let's come around this turn here, and then I'm going to hit the brakes. Again, please don't try this at home. And it also mitigates the dive in the front. Now let's accelerate. It mitigates the squat in the rear. That's why this thing's outfitted with an air ride. And I have to say, the tuning in the convertible here changes the driving dynamics of this, where I actually prefer the driving dynamics of this over the sedan. Now, as we start to go downhill here and the road gets no less twisty, let's circle back to that satellite transmission. Just kind of a recap here. We covered this in the Ghost 2 episode. Make sure you check that out. And really what this thing is doing is it's connecting the mapping of the transmission to the GIS data and all of the data from the GPS system. So the car is trying to predict where you are going, and the logic is to keep or really get the prudent gear for wherever you are. So in cases like this, where I've got tight roads, it's holding a lower gear. So what happens when I come out of a turn like this and put my foot into it, it doesn't have to go hunt for a gear, which is one of the troubles of like these 8 and 9-speed transmissions. Now in this case, it's an 8-speed. But really, this combined with the air suspension is working in conjunction to get the composure of a 5,644-pound car. And I've tried this trick in towns, and I said earlier that I prefer the driving dynamics of this over the Ghost and the Wraith. And it's, I would say, because this is more nimble in town. At least it feels more nimble in town. Like with a Rolls Royce, you almost feel like afraid of it to drive it. But it's like when you get to that point about a certain feeling, like when you can't encapsulate that certain feeling. But what's going on here, after driving it for a couple of days now, you get familiarity with this quicker than you do in the Ghost. And really, luxury, if you're really paying for something, what you're paying for is familiarity. So up until this point, I feel like we've been avoiding the elephant in the room here. The roof. Now, a little personal bias. This thing looks sinister. And that's kind of hard to pull off because the Wraith already looked cool and sinister. This in person, even more sinister. And yes, that's a big function of Giles Taylor and his design crew in Goodwood, but it's also a function of the people that actually assemble the roof. So yes, it's made out of like Cambria cloth or canvas, whatever you want to call it, but really it's how the pieces are attached. They use this French seam type technique, which kind of hides the seam, so like when you stand back, it looks like it's one piece of flowing cloth. Very cool, but how does it work? Now the engineers in Goodwood tell me this is as quiet as a Wraith on the inside, so for the sake of science, let's find out. You hear anything? Here, let me shake things up a bit for you. The engine sounds pretty good, but the car is still pretty quiet. And I've been driving this thing now for like 5 days in like mixed use. So around town, a little bit on the freeway and definitely up here. And you just, even at like high speeds, it's just a slight hush. But really, are you surprised that a Rolls Royce convertible is like super quiet? So let's just put that aside and let's focus on the headliner. Like this leading piece here is like finished in this very simple, nice leather. But this is the thing that you have to behold. Have you ever been inside like a classic car from 30s era? Whether it's like a coach-built car or even like a fancy Lincoln, like a LeBaron finished Chrysler or like a Cadillac, they have these stunning headliners in here with this type of finish. I don't know the name of it, but Santa Maria Madre de Dios, is this stunning. Now granted, I'd love the Starlight thing in here, but maybe that's asking too much. But really, while we're here, let's focus on some other bits. You got this cool button here where you can get to the infotainment system, but frankly, I really don't want to do that. Let's get the wood dash down here, because come on, sorry, with a fringe on top. It has a trackpad here, but you know what? You and I drive so many cars nowadays and play with these trackpads and Apple CarPlay and all that kind of stuff. When we have a special car like this, let's get back to what's special about it. Which brings up another bit from the Goodwood engineers. They tell me that you can operate the top up to about 30 miles an hour. So that's about where we are right now. Let's get back to the business of the Dawn. So yes, this may be a Rolls Royce convertible, but it's also a convertible, which means it has challenges in the packaging department, especially for backseat passengers. So we should probably try this out. But there's just one specific challenge in that department, because we can't forget that this is indeed a Rolls Royce, like they remind you on the dorsal here. And it has floor mats that are $1,200. So why don't you and I get prepared and see if we can actually fit a real human being, 6 foot tall, in the back of the Rolls Royce Dawn. Oh my God, there's actually room in this thing. That is where I would drive, and I have plenty of room, like not just to go to lunch or dinner with my friends, but I could sit back here and meet new people. Kind of feel like I almost want to sing, "Won't you be my neighbor?" So, yeah, enough with the backseat business. Now, I have never been one to complain that these are not pleasant places to spend a lot of time in, especially this one with the rosewood. But excuse me for being Captain Obvious here, but what makes this one more special is there is no roof. And yes, I am ridiculously biased that most cars I have owned have had folding roofs or some sort of Targa roof or something like that. But here it's actually not just the roof that makes it more special, or lack thereof. It's the roof with the traditional Rolls Royce bits in it. Specifically the steering wheel and like the control stalks. Now, I don't know what you guys grew up with. I grew up with old Buicks and Chevys, and they had crappy thin steering wheels because they were just crappy cars. This steering wheel is like handed down from like Rolls Royce steering wheels from like back in the day when they were built in like old munitions factories. Which is to say, you get a specific feel because of the wheel, and this in combination with these very delicate stalks here. And really, it works in conjunction with the clock as well, because in a car like this, you're reminded, and it's that same reminder you got when you first got into like a management level position. In situations like this, you are no longer late to things. You are simply held up. And really, it's the combination of all of this that makes this, it's not about presence, it's not about proportions, it's not just my most favorite Rolls Royce to drive. It is, for lack of a better term, that you wear this and you do it with style. So in summary, what do we got? Well, to be forthright, an admission. Over the past 6-7 years, I have not been shy in sharing my incredible infatuation for the Bentley Mulsanne. Not that I'm a Bentley guy or even into those kind of cars, but oh my God, do I love the Bentley Mulsanne. Not that I don't have respect and admiration for a Rolls Royce, especially what BMW has done to reinvent arguably one of the most storied marques in the world. And they did it through design. Like, look at the proportions. They started there and hung everything off of that. But still, at the end of the day, it's more cerebral for me with a Rolls Royce. Kind of like the really smart girl, but she's not like the hot one that like makes your heart skip a beat. But then we have the Dawn. And like a school kid in love, I can't explain to you why, but oh my God, do I love this. It is like the heart skips a beat like with the Bentley, but this is like the right size Rolls Royce. It's the proportions, it's the design, it's the presence, but it's all in exactly the right shape and size. And yes, the fact that the roof goes down doesn't hurt it, because we all know when the roof goes down, the value goes up. So with that, this has been really kind of weighing on my brain of this type of thing, which is a grand convertible. And like way back in the day, and when I say back in the day, I mean like the 60s, even the 50s, there were many grand convertibles. They were convertibles, but they weren't so much fancy convertibles like Rolls Royce, Bentley, or even now the Mercedes S-Class, which we are going to have on the show shortly. But my question to you is this: is there room for a grand convertible, but one not with a fancy brand associated with it? So think of it like a grand convertible that could be like a premium American, Japanese, or even a German car, but not as fancy as this. So my question is very specific: is there room for this? And what is that interpretation? And frankly, where do you think it should come from? And you know what, for good measure, let me know if you have experience with a grand convertible like this, because when I think of grand convertibles, I think of like the Buick Electra 225, or like the old Chrysler Imperials, or even like the Pontiac Grand Prix convertible. They only made it like 1 year in like '68. And anyway, not trying to compare Buicks, Pontiacs, and Chryslers to a Rolls Royce, but you get the idea. Is there room in today's day and age for a grand convertible? So let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to leave you with two things. Number one, make sure you download our fancy new mobile application, which you can download for free at Apple iTunes or Google Play. And number two, a fun fact. So the Spirit of Ecstasy here, she is fitted as standard to this car. This one, as optional, has an LED light. But there is another option you can have fitted to this, which thankfully is not on this one. The Spirit of Ecstasy, you can have that finished in gold plating. So, until I see you next time, bis später.